The hotel receipts shook in my hands. 3 different ones: the Dynasty Inn, the Lakeview Suites, the Highland Lodge, all dated during Garrett's supposed overnight shifts. My chest tightened when I heard his key in the lock. "What are you doing going through my things?" His voice sliced the silence as he stood in our bedroom doorway, loosening his tie. 3 different hotels in 2 weeks, I managed, barely above a whisper. "Always when you claim to be working overnight shifts." He crossed the room in 3 swift strides, towering over me. "Keep questioning me and you'll face consequences," he warned, breath hot against my cheek. I held the receipts higher. What consequences could be worse than finding out my husband is cheating on me? His jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing at his temple. "This stops now. You won't like what happens if you keep digging." He snatched the receipts, tearing them into tiny pieces that fluttered to the carpet. The destruction did nothing. I'd already taken photos while sitting on the bathroom floor, hands trembling. I should have listened. Maybe things would have ended differently. For the next week, Garrett watched me constantly. He checked my search history, monitored my calls, even asked what I discussed with the neighbor. Our 5-year marriage had become a gilded cage, but this new surveillance made it feel like solitary confinement. 3 weeks after our confrontation, while we existed in a frosty standoff, his mother collapsed at her house. By evening, she was gone, a sudden heart attack at 62. Garrett transformed overnight into the grieving, devoted son, accepting condolences with dignified nods while I played the supportive wife. Eleanor had always been kind to me, even when I suspected she saw through her son's facade. During holiday gatherings, she'd squeeze my hand under the table when Garrett spoke over me or contradicted something I'd said. Just a quick pressure, a silent acknowledgement that she noticed. "You're a strong woman, Amelie," she'd told me during our last private conversation, 3 months before her death. "Remember that, no matter what." The night before the funeral, while Garrett showered, his phone lit up. The preview showed, "Missing you already. Tomorrow night still good?" I hesitated briefly before unlocking it with the pattern I'd memorized months ago. What I discovered made my entire body go rigid. The night his mother died, his father had called him repeatedly. "She's asking for you." One message read, "The doctors say it's serious. Please call back." 6 missed calls over 2 hours. But according to texts with his lover, someone saved as work project, Garrett had been at her apartment during those crucial hours. He'd silenced his phone deliberately after seeing his father's calls. When he finally arrived at the hospital the next morning, his mother had already passed. I scrolled through message after message, my horror mounting. "Work project. Are you sure you shouldn't go? It's your mom." "Garrett, Dad exaggerates everything. She probably just needs her medication adjusted." "Work project. If you're sure." "Garrett, I'm where I want to be tonight. With you." An hour later, when his father messaged that the situation had worsened. "Garrett, sorry. Phone was dying and I'm still at work. Heading to the hospital now." But his location data showed he didn't leave her apartment until 2:17 a.m., over 4 hours after his father's urgent messages began, and 2 hours after his mother had passed. The shower shut off. I quickly replaced his phone exactly as I'd found it and retreated to my side of the bed, mind racing with what I'd discovered. His mother had died asking for him, while he ignored calls to stay with his lover. If you're finding this story hitting close to home, or if it's resonating with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Your support means everything, and it helps more people find these stories who might need them. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an update. Now, let's continue. My name is Amelie, and until 5 years ago, I was a certified public accountant with a promising career. I met Garrett at a charity gala where I was volunteering. He charmed everyone that night, tall, with piercing green eyes and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips to nearby towns, surprise picnics, handwritten notes left on my windshield. 6 months later, he proposed on a sailboat at sunset. I said yes without hesitation. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible. First came suggestions about my wardrobe. "That color washes you out." Then my friends, "Don't you think Danielle is a bit negative?" Then my career. "Why stress yourself with 60-hour work weeks?" he asked one Sunday morning, tracing circles on my bare shoulder. "My income is more than enough. You could work part-time somewhere low pressure if you want something to do." By our second anniversary, I'd left my accounting position for a part-time job at a boutique clothing store. Garrett managed our finances despite my degree, isolated me from friends who weren't good influences, and tracked my whereabouts through my phone for safety. When I landed that boutique position, he made sure everyone knew it was his generosity that allowed me this hobby. At dinner parties, he'd rest his hand on the back of my neck while saying, Amelie enjoys playing shop girl a few days a week, keeps her busy. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and misty, appropriate for the heaviness in my chest. I dressed in a simple black dress and pearl earrings that had been a gift from Eleanor last Christmas. Garrett prepared to deliver the eulogy, practicing in the mirror with tears that seemed to appear on command. He'd written a moving speech about devotion, about always being there for family, about rushing to the hospital the moment he heard his mother was ill. In the car, he reached for my hand. "Thank you for supporting me through this," he said, his voice cracking perfectly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I allowed him to hold my hand, though his touch made my skin crawl. "Family is everything," I replied, the irony bitter on my tongue. At the funeral home, mourners packed the main hall. Eleanor had been beloved in the community, a retired school nurse who volunteered with literacy programs and knitted caps for premature babies. Her husband, Albert, sat hollow-eyed in the front row, aged a decade in a week. Before the service began, I excused myself to use the restroom. Locked in a stall, I pulled out my phone and stared at the message I'd drafted. Attached were screenshots of everything: the ignored calls from his father that night, the exchanges with his lover, and the location data proving he was across town. My thumb hovered over the send button. The recipients, everyone in attendance whose numbers I had collected while helping Garrett coordinate the funeral arrangements. Was I crossing a line? Would this hurt Albert too much? The grieving husband who'd spent his wife's final moments alone, desperately calling the son who chose to ignore him? A knock on the stall door startled me. "Amelie," it was Garrett's Aunt Patricia. "They're about to begin. Your husband is looking for you." "I'll be right there," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. I tucked my phone into my clutch, decision unmade, and returned to the main hall where I took my place in the front row beside Albert. Garrett stood at the podium, handsome in his dark suit, expression appropriately somber as he began to speak. "My mother was the strongest person I've ever known." He started, voice thick with emotion. "She taught me the importance of family, of being there for each other in times of need." I watched Albert's shoulders hunch forward with each word. The elderly man seemed to shrink in on himself as Garrett continued his performance. "When I got the call that she was in the hospital," Garrett was saying, "I dropped everything and rushed to be by her side." My clutch felt heavy in my lap, the phone within it heavier still. Garrett's voice broke as he continued. "She was always there when I needed her. I only hope she knew how much I loved her." I thought of Eleanor's hand squeezing mine under the table. "You're a strong woman, Amelie. Remember that, no matter what." My fingers closed around my phone through the fabric of my clutch. The choice I made in the next moment would change everything. My thumb hovered over the send button as Garrett continued his performance. "She believed in honesty above all else," he said, wiping a tear. "Mom always told me, the truth may hurt, but lies destroy." The irony was suffocating. I glanced at Albert, whose grief was genuine, raw, and unpolished, unlike my husband's calculated display. I thought of Eleanor's voice, her warmth, her quiet strength. Then I pressed send. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then came the notifications, a near-simultaneous chorus of soft vibrations and muted pings throughout the room. I watched as mourners discreetly checked their phones, then stiffened in their seats. Garrett faltered mid-sentence, noticing the shift. Confusion crossed his face as more people looked from their screens to him, expressions morphing from sympathy to shock. I had set a 1-minute delay for Albert's message. His phone remained silent as others began to whisper. Garrett attempted to regain control. As I was saying my mother's compassion, he stopped as Albert's phone finally buzzed. I watched the elderly man's trembling hands retrieve it, adjust his glasses, and read. His face transformed, confusion, disbelief, then a rage so profound it seemed to straighten his spine. Albert stood, phone clutched in his hand. "You weren't there," he said, voice carrying through the hushed room. "You told me your phone died, that you never got my messages until it was too late." Garrett froze at the podium, speechless. His eyes darted around the room, settling on me with sudden understanding. "She asked for you with her last conscious words," Albert continued, voice rising. "Where were you while your mother was dying?" Whispers rippled through the gathering as Garrett's perfectly constructed image crumbled. His panicked gaze remained locked on mine, finally comprehending what consequences truly meant. I stood and walked toward the exit, past rows of stunned faces. Behind me, I heard Albert's voice crack as he addressed the confused congregation. "My son told me he was working that night, that his phone died, but these messages." He couldn't finish. I pushed through the double doors into the cool autumn air, gulping it like I'd been underwater. For 5 years, I'd been drowning in Garrett's lies. Now I could finally breathe. My sister Lydia waited in her car as planned. I slid into the passenger seat, hands shaking. "Did you do it?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak as 5 years of suppressed emotions crashed over me. Lydia squeezed my hand and pulled away from the curb. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Garrett and I had met at the Riverside Community Center's annual charity gala. I was 28, had just made junior partner at my accounting firm, and volunteered regularly at the center. He was 34, worked in medical equipment sales, and had donated significantly to the center's youth programs. When he approached me that evening, I was tallying the silent auction bids. "You're the only person in this room who's been working all night instead of enjoying themselves," he observed, offering me a glass of champagne. "Someone has to make sure the numbers add up," I replied with a smile. His laugh was warm, genuine. An accountant with a heart of gold. Rare combination. We talked for hours that night. About our childhoods, his privileged, mine working class. About our dreams, his to start his own business someday, mine to eventually open a financial literacy program for underserved communities. "Numbers were my safe place growing up," I told him. "In a chaotic house, math was predictable, reliable." "And you?" I asked. "What drew you to medical sales?" "The challenge," he said. "Matching the right equipment to the right hospitals, knowing my work helps save lives indirectly." Only years later would I learn he'd been fired from 3 previous sales positions for ethical violations, that his success came from manipulating hospital administrators and cutting corners on safety regulations. During our courtship, Garrett was attentive in ways no one had ever been. He remembered small details, that I preferred lilies to roses, that I couldn't drink red wine because it triggered migraines, that I'd always wanted to see Prague. For my 30th birthday, 6 months into our relationship, he surprised me with a weekend at a historic mountain lodge. Over dinner, he presented me with a small blue box. "It's not what you think," he said, noting my wide eyes. "Not yet, anyway." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm, the Charles Bridge in Prague. "A promise," he explained. "Someday I'll take you there." 3 months later, he proposed. We never did go to Prague. Lydia had seen through Garrett from the beginning. "He watches you like you're a possession," she warned after first meeting him. "And have you noticed how he talks over you?" I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. Lydia had practically raised me after our mother died. Her suspicion of any man in my life was nothing new. But after the wedding, even I couldn't ignore the changes. Garrett's suggestions became commands. His attentiveness morphed into control. His charm in public contrasted sharply with his coldness in private. The isolation happened so gradually I barely noticed. First, my closest friends became too negative or jealous of our happiness. Then my weekly dinners with Lydia were excessive when we had so little time together with his travel schedule. When I received a promotion opportunity at work, Garrett convinced me the stress wasn't worth it. "You're already so anxious all the time," he said, massaging my shoulders one evening. "Wouldn't it be nice to have a simpler job, something that doesn't follow you home?" The part-time position at the boutique was his idea. The owner, Margot, was the wife of one of his clients. The job paid poorly but offered flexible hours and employee discounts perfect for a hobby, as Garrett called it. What he didn't know was that Margot had become my confidant. When I arrived at work with sunglasses hiding sleepless, tear-swollen eyes, she would usher me into the back room for tea. "My first husband was like that," she told me once. Charming to everyone else, cruel behind closed doors. It took me 7 years to leave. "Garrett isn't cruel," I defended automatically. "He's just particular." Margot's reply haunted me. "Abuse isn't always bruises, Amelie." The first concrete evidence of his affair came last Christmas. Garrett had claimed to be at a sales conference in Boston, but his credit card statement showed a charge at a local steakhouse where we'd once celebrated our anniversary. When confronted, he dismissed it effortlessly. "The conference was canceled last minute. I was going to surprise you, but then got pulled into an emergency meeting with a client who happened to be in town." I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but doubt had planted itself firmly in my mind. Then came the hotel receipts 3 weeks ago. The Dynasty Inn, where he claimed to be working late on a proposal. The Lakeview Suites, during his supposed overnight shift covering for a colleague. The Highland Lodge, when he told me he had an early morning meeting and would stay near the venue. For 3 weeks after our confrontation about the receipts, Garrett watched me like a hawk. He insisted I leave my phone in his sight when I showered. He dropped by the boutique unexpectedly. He even installed a new home security system that sent movement alerts to his phone. The night Eleanor died, he'd been unusually agitated, checking his phone frequently during dinner. "Everything okay?" I'd asked. "Fine. Just waiting on some work emails." When his phone rang displaying Dad, he silenced it without answering. "Telemarketer," he muttered, though I'd clearly seen the caller ID. An hour later, I heard the notification sounds from the bathroom where he'd left his phone. 3 consecutive messages. When he didn't return from the garage where he'd gone to check on a noise, I peeked at his screen. The preview showed 3 texts from his father. Eleanor collapsed. "We're at Memorial Hospital. Call me now." When I brought his phone to him in the garage, his face drained of color, but not from shock, Sprence's, from being caught in a lie. He was fully dressed with car keys in hand. "I need to go," he said, brushing past me. "Mom's in the hospital." He didn't return until morning, smelling of unfamiliar perfume beneath hasty shower soap. By then, Eleanor was gone. Now, 3 days after the funeral, I sat in Lydia's guest bedroom staring at my silent phone. Garrett had called 37 times, left 14 voicemails. Each message grew increasingly desperate. "Amelie, please come home so we can talk. This isn't what you think. You've completely misunderstood everything. You're making a huge mistake." The latest, from an hour ago, had shifted to threatening. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone I know. If you think there aren't consequences for that, you're sadly mistaken. Come home now, or you'll regret it." Lydia entered with a mug of tea. "Still calling?" I nodded, accepting the steaming cup. "He's starting to threaten me now." She sat beside me on the bed. "Then it's time to tell you something. I've been talking to Margot." My head snapped up. "About what?" "About the other women. There have been at least 3 that Margot knows about. And..." She hesitated. "What?" "Amelie, his previous girlfriend, filed a restraining order against him 2 months before he met you. Margot's husband represented him in court." The mug slipped from my fingers, hot tea splashing across my legs. I barely felt it. "How long have you known this?" "Since last year. I've been trying to find a way to tell you, to help you leave safely. I was afraid if I told you too soon, you wouldn't believe me, and he'd cut me off completely." She was right. 6 months ago, I would have defended him, convinced Lydia was trying to sabotage my marriage out of misplaced protectiveness. My phone buzzed with a text. Not from Garrett, but from Albert. "Can we meet tomorrow? There's something you should know." I stared at Albert's message, anxiety gnawing at my stomach. What could he possibly want to tell me? Had Garrett convinced him I'd acted maliciously? "I'll go with you," Lydia offered when I showed her the text. "No," I said firmly. "This is something I need to do alone." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between Lydia's apartment and Albert's house. When I arrived the next morning, Albert was already there, looking smaller somehow without Eleanor beside him. They'd been married 43 years. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice gravelly as I slid into the booth across from him. "Of course," I replied, unsure what else to say. Albert studied me for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Eleanor wanted you to have this. She asked me to give it to you if anything happened to her." My hands trembled as I accepted it. She knew she was sick?" He shook his head. "No, nothing like that. She just had concerns. About you. About Garrett." He cleared his throat. "My wife was perceptive. She noticed things." The envelope felt heavy in my hands. "When did she give this to you?" "About 6 months ago, after your last Thanksgiving together. She was troubled by something she observed between you and our son." He paused. I should have paid more attention. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small key. "I'll give you privacy," Albert said, sliding out of the booth. "I'll be at the counter when you're ready to talk." Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled the single page. "My dear Amelie, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Albert has honored my request to give you this letter. I hope I'm wrong about everything, but I've lived long enough to trust my instincts. I see how my son treats you, the small ways he diminishes you, the isolation from your sister, the way your eyes constantly search his face for approval. I recognize it because I watched my own sister endure similar treatment for 20 years before finding the courage to leave. You deserve better than to live under someone else's control." The enclosed key opens a safety deposit box at First Regional Bank, number 247. Inside is enough to help you start over if you ever need to. Consider it a gift with no strings attached. Whatever you decide, know that you have strength within you. I've seen glimpses of it whenever Garrett isn't looking. With love and hope, Eleanor, tears blurred my vision. Even before her death, Eleanor had been trying to help me escape. She'd seen what I couldn't or wouldn't admit to myself. Albert returned to the booth as I carefully folded the letter. She knew, didn't she? I asked softly. About who Garrett really is. Albert nodded, his eyes weary. Eleanor always said there were two Garretts, the one everyone else saw, and the real one. She tried to reach him, to understand what made him this way. In the end, she blamed herself for not seeing the signs earlier. It wasn't her fault, I whispered. No, Albert agreed. But that didn't stop her from trying to protect the people she loved. He gestured to the letter in my hands, including you. I'm so sorry about what happened at the funeral, I said, guilt washing over me. I never meant to cause you more pain. Albert's weathered hand covered mine. You showed me the truth. However painful, it was something I needed to know. He paused. He's been lying to me about other things too. Financial matters. I found out he's been taking money from my accounts. I wasn't surprised. Garrett had always been secretive about finances, despite my accounting background. What will you do now? Albert asked. I touched the key. Start over. After meeting with Albert, I went directly to the bank. The safety deposit box contained $25,000 in cash, a note explaining it was Eleanor's personal inheritance money, and a small velvet pouch containing her grandmother's diamond earrings. For your new beginning, a small card read in her handwriting. I called Lydia from the bank parking lot. I'm going to stay with Aunt Joanne in Colorado for a while, I told her. I need distance to figure out my next steps. When will you leave? Tomorrow morning. I need to get some things from the house first. You can't go alone, Lydia protested. Garrett might be there. He won't be. Albert said he's staying at a hotel downtown. Apparently the neighbors have been less than welcoming since the funeral. Nevertheless, Lydia insisted on coming with me to the house I'd shared with Garrett for 5 years. We parked in the driveway at 10 a.m. when I knew the neighbors would be at work and the street would be quiet. The house felt different, emptier somehow, as if Garrett's absence had changed its very essence. I moved quickly, gathering only what mattered most: family photos, important documents, sentimental items from before our marriage. In our bedroom, I hesitated before the closet where I'd found the hotel receipts. Something compelled me to check again, to look deeper. Behind the winter clothes was a small metal lockbox I'd never noticed before. Lydia, I called, do you think you could open this? My sister had an uncanny ability with locks, a skill acquired during her rebellious teenage years. Simple tumbler mechanism, she muttered, using a hairpin from her pocket. The lock clicked open within minutes. Inside were things Garrett never wanted me to find. A thumb drive, several passport photos of himself, a stack of letters addressed to someone named Elise, and a small notebook filled with what appeared to be financial calculations. The thumb drive revealed the extent of his deception when we plugged it into Lydia's laptop. Bank statements showing multiple accounts I knew nothing about. Tax returns with figures that didn't match what we'd filed. Property deeds for 2 condominiums purchased within the last 3 years. He's been hiding money, I whispered, my accounting background allowing me to see the pattern immediately. Lots of it. From who? Lydia asked. You? Me. And the government. I pointed to discrepancies in his tax filings. This is tax fraud. As I continued scrolling through files, an email draft caught my eye, addressed to my darling Elise. Everything is proceeding as planned. Once Mother passes, the inheritance will be substantial. With Amelie's signature on the joint accounts, we'll have access to everything. Then we can finally be together openly. 2 years at most. I promise. My hands went cold. The date on the draft, 3 months ago, long before Eleanor's unexpected death. He was waiting for her to die, I whispered. He was planning to take Albert's money. And yours, Lydia added grimly. I looked at her, realization dawning. He needed my signature because I'm his spouse. Without me, he can't access certain accounts or properties. The revenge I'd executed at the funeral suddenly felt inadequate compared to what Garrett had planned. He hadn't just betrayed me with affairs. He'd been systematically preparing to drain me financially before discarding me. We gathered everything from the lockbox, along with my personal belongings. As we were leaving, I noticed the blinking light on our home security system, the one Garrett had installed to monitor my movements. An idea formed, reckless, perhaps, but fitting. Wait, I told Lydia. I need 10 more minutes. I sat at the kitchen table and composed 3 letters. One to the IRS with detailed explanations of Garrett's tax fraud. One to Albert, warning him about Garrett's financial schemes and including copies of relevant documents. And one to Garrett himself. I know everything, I wrote, about Elise. about your plans for after Eleanor's death, about the hidden properties and accounts. The authorities will too by the time you read this. You warned me about consequences. Here are yours. I set the letters on the kitchen table, where the security camera would clearly show I'd left them there, untampered with. As we drove away, Lydia glanced at me. Will you be okay? For the first time in years, I felt certainty. Yes, I think I finally will be. 3 days later, safely at my aunt's house in Colorado, I received a call from Albert. Garrett was arrested this morning, he said without preamble. Tax evasion, wire fraud, and attempted grand theft. The evidence was substantial. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I knew Albert was losing his son right after losing his wife. Don't be, he replied firmly. Eleanor would have done the same thing. She valued truth above all else. 6 months later, I stood on the summit of a Colorado hiking trail, watching the sun set over the mountains. My new accounting job at a local firm was challenging and fulfilling. My small rental cottage felt more like home than the house with Garrett ever had. My phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Garrett's sentencing was today. 8 years. Albert is doing well. We had lunch last week. He asked about you. I smiled, typing back. Tell him I'm using Eleanor's gift exactly as she intended for a new beginning. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't what you plan meticulously, it's simply exposing the truth and walking away. Garrett lost everything because of his own actions. His inheritance, his freedom, his carefully constructed facade. I gained something far more valuable, myself. If my story resonates with you, please tap that like button. It helps others who might be going through similar situations find this. Consider subscribing for more real stories about overcoming life's challenges. And if you know someone who might be trapped in a controlling relationship, share this as a reminder that everyone deserves freedom. Remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply walk away.